So sticking with this same supply shifter of changes in prices of other goods, the last example we did was complements. So if we look at substitute goods, so if we look at cheer and tide, we don't use those goods together, we would use one in place of the other. If the price of cheer went up, we're seeing that the quantity supplied of cheer would also increase. So if we're supplying more cheer, we're going to supply less tide, and that would cause the entire supply curve to shift. And there's a price label up here in case you can't see it, but it is labeled. So again, the whole goal of these supply shifters is to think like a supplier. Changes in the price of inputs, if it costs more to create our product. So when fertilizer prices go up or if land costs go up, we're not going to be able to supply as much, so supply would decrease. If it costs less, supply would increase and shift to the right. Technology can also impact supply, and we've seen this incredibly in agriculture. If you think back 50 years, we kind of talked about this before, what was going on with agriculture? Well, we had a lot of workers and not a lot of machines. Well, now that we have increase in technology, we can increase our supply. And we don't normally go back in time, so we wouldn't see a decrease, given the technology. But most of the time when new technology comes out, it now becomes cheaper for us to produce, and so we can produce more. Changes in government constraints is the fourth supply shifter. And if anyone knows anything about the tobacco industry, there used to be what we call quotas with the tobacco industry. And a quota is where the government instituted that a producer could only produce so much. They only had a set amount that they were allowed to produce. And if the government were to lift that, which they did, what that allows the tobacco producers to do is to increase the supply of tobacco. And if the government were to institute a constraint and say that we could only produce so much corn or so much wheat, what that would do is that would restrict supply or decrease supply. Weather and disease, it's kind of under the same number, but we can count it as two separate ones. If there is good growing weather, we're going to see an increase in supply. If there is bad growing weather, we would see a decrease in supply, and we would draw our curve over on this side. If there's an increase in disease or pests, we're going to see a decrease in supply. If there's a decrease in disease or pests, we would see an increase in supply. So think about how this would apply to your crops that you produce or your family produces. Number of suppliers. If there's an increase in the number of suppliers, we're going to see an increase in supply. If there's a decrease in the number of suppliers, we're going to see a decrease in supply. The last one is we call producer expectations. If the producers expect to sell more, they're going to try to supply more. If they expect to sell less, they're going to supply less.